So now we're on to lesson 3, which is all about building a timeline or assembling a timeline. It covers the most basic editing functions in Resolve: insert, overwrite, and replace. So to begin with, what we do is we talk about how we have our bins all set up and our metadata all set up, and we want to move to start editing a timeline. So we switch over to the edit page, and we do give a little bit of a preview of the edit page again: source viewer, timeline viewer, the timeline, and our media pool. And we talk about wanting to create a new bin. So we're going to select our master bin because it will target to go inside of our master bin. If we have any other bin selected, the new bin we create will go inside of those bins. So I'm going to come up and I'm going to choose to create a new bin and call it Rough Cuts. And in my Rough Cuts bin, I'm then going to come up and say New Timeline. And the timeline dialog comes up. I'm going to call it my first rough cut. And then say Create. Now you can tell that you have a new timeline in a couple of different ways. One is that you have a timeline header with a video and audio 1 track. You have a timeline ruler and a playhead. You also have a red name up above the viewer that tells you that this is the first rough cut, and it's in this viewer. And in your rough cuts bin, you can see that you have an icon for the timeline. Now what we might want to do is, since your timeline bin is such an important bin, you often go back to it very frequently, you might want to organize it even further by color coding it. So we can right click over it and come down to where it says color tag, and I'm going to use cyan just right up here, and then say OK. Now because it looks black and white, you can see that if we click off it, here's the cyan, but it looks black and white when it's selected. But now we have our timeline bin and our timeline created. We can now come in and start editing something together. So I'm going to start with my interview bin. And these clips may look a little bit small, so I might increase the thumbnail size on them. And we're going to start with the first one. So they're numbered 01, 02, and 03. So I'm going to start with the first one, but just by double clicking it into the viewer and going to the very beginning of the clip. Now we have our overlay on. If you don't have it on, you might want to come up and say show zoomed audio waveform, but we turned it on previously, so it should be on by the time you do this. We really pick up with the first time he speaks, and that's where we're going to set an in point. So we play it.
Yeah. So in this film,
so we can come in between the words "so" and "in this film," and we're going to find a location here. And instead of using the buttons in and out like we did in the first lesson, we're going to use keyboard shortcuts I for in point. So we're going to mark an in point just by pressing the I key. And then we're going to play this clip.
In this film, making a documentary about how the airplanes changed the world, it was really important to go out and shoot the real world and how the airplane is connecting and making all the things possible.
So right at the word possible is where we want to change that. Now you can skim it over here. Or if you want to make sure that you're in between, you can use the arrow keys. Left and right arrow keys will move you one frame at a time, backwards and forwards. So we're going to make sure that we're right in between the word possible and the next word. So you can see that little gap there. And we're going to hit, instead of pressing the out button on the viewer, we're going to hit the O key for out. And you can see the little in and out shaded area under the viewer telling us we have our in and out point. Now, we're going to make our first edit into the timeline. The first edit isn't unique because there's nothing in the timeline to be concerned about. So we're just going to drag from the source viewer into the timeline viewer to get our edit overlay. And the edit overlay shows you every single editing function that exists in Resolve. The highlighted one is the one you would perform even if you don't hover over anything, if you just drop it right in the center of the timeline viewer. In this case, it's an overwrite. And again, it doesn't really matter in this case because there's nothing in the timeline to be worried about. So we're just going to choose overwrite and let it go. And we get our clip into our first clip cut into our timeline. Now we're going to go over and we're going to choose the next clip. So we're going to come in and we're going to go over to 02. Same interview bin, go to the beginning of this clip, And we're going to start playing it. And again, these have slides on the slide presentation that tell you roughly the sentence that you're looking for. So in class, you don't have to repeat yourself over and over. But we're looking for an in point where he says, if it was possible.
All 7 continents, 18 countries, it was very important that everything was real. If it was possible to shoot it,
So there we go, if it was possible. Now, a nice way to teach them how to move around, certainly you could drag that little playhead back, but you can also teach them here how to use the J, K, and L keys. So obviously J playing backwards, K pausing it, and L playing forward.
Everything was real. If it was possible to
So there's if it was possible. Now you can teach them how to press K and J together to go slow backwards. And K and L together to go slowly forward.
Was real.
And there was if. So I'm going to use now K and J just to go 1 frame back at a time. And 1 frame forward with K and L. And there's if right there. You can see it right in between there. And I'm just going to mark an in point using my I key. And then I'm going to hit L twice and look for the sentence that says, every shot was original. And again, this is on the slide preso, so I'll just quickly.
Shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that location, stay at that location longer, or it didn't make the movie. It was really important. Every shot was original and that everything was real.
So you can see everything was real. So now I'm going to go slowly backwards and forwards.
And that everything was real.
And maybe use my K and L just to make sure I'm in between those points there. And then hit O for out point. And here I have my mark in and out point. Now, to make sure that I have an in and out point marked correctly, you can preview it by going up to playback in the menu here, coming down to play around to and play into out, which is on the Mac option / or on Windows Alt /. Now play into out will back it up to the in point and play it to the out point. So I listen to exactly what I would get if I cut this in.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that location, stay at that location longer, or it didn't make the movie. It was really important. Every shot was original and that everything was real.
So it ends and starts and ends exactly where I want them to. If it didn't, I could nudge it using my arrow keys or my J, K, and L keys and mark a new out point or a new in point if I needed to. So now I can just add this into my timeline, and we can just drag it from the source, but we teach them a different way now. So in each edit, we kind of teach them the edit overlay and then the toolbar function. So in this case, we're going to use the toolbar, and down in the toolbar, you have 3 buttons here, and the first button in that list of 3 is your insert button. It's also F9 on the keyboard. So you can click on this button and it will perform an insert, or the one next to it is an overwrite. The same thing as dragging it from the source to the timeline is right here in the toolbar, overwrite. So there's nothing in this timeline except that first clip. Wherever our playhead is, that's where we're going to edit it, if you remember that from lesson 1. And we're just going to click overwrite to add in our second clip there. So now we have that together. And we're going to start, and we switch to insert now. So we choose a new clip, and we're going to come up to our B-roll. So this is where we're going to insert a B-roll in between these 2 interview clips. So we come down to our smart bins, go to B-roll, and on this one we use the 08 South Pole clip, and we just play that from the beginning, or you can scrub it. You don't have to play it. It's a reasonably short clip, but where we start is we don't want to start right at the beginning, just where you see the tail emerge from behind this sign. It really doesn't matter. You're just giving yourself a little bit of room at the beginning, and you're going to hit I for in point. Now we want to take this whole clip to the end, and we don't have to mark an out point if we don't want to. It just, as you can see by the shaded area, it's going to take the entire clip from the in point to this out point. It's going to insert it wherever we place the playhead. So I'm going to move my playhead in between these 2 clips, and you can feel it snapping. So I know I'm in between the 2 clips, and I'm going to perform an insert by going up to my source viewer, dragging into my timeline viewer, and instead of performing an overwrite, just drag it up to insert and let go. And in my timeline, you can see this now pushes my second shot down and inserts this South Pole clip in between the 2 interview clips. All right, so there we have our first insert. Now let's do another insert. This time we're going to use the button, obviously. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to load it in. And we're going to use, in this case, we're going to use the Milky Way clip. Now this Milky Way clip, you can play it or you can scrub through it. It's a time-lapse shot. We're going to use the whole thing, so we're not going to use any marks. And where are we going to play it? Well, insert doesn't have to happen between two clips. You can actually split a clip in half if you want to. So I'm going to play this second interview.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that location, stay at that location longer, or it didn't make the movie. It was really important.
So you can see this in a slide as well. We want to split it at just before he says it was really important, because that's going to be a separate line. We're going to separate them. This is going to be the last line of the movie.
Every shot was original and that everything was real.
So what you're doing is you can use the waveform that's in the timeline, and you want to find the point where he says
longer, or it didn't make the movie. It was really important.
It didn't make the movie. It was really important. So in between those two sentences, and you can use your J, K, and L keys, or you can nudge.
Longer, or it didn't make the movie.
Right, and if I want to. And here I can just leave my playhead right there because I know that's where it's going to perform the insert. So if I just wanted to insert, I could just drag it into the timeline viewer and get my edit overlay, or use the toolbar. And that first button is insert, it's F9. And when I perform that, it's going to split this clip in two and insert the Milky Way. So there's another way to perform an insert edit. So let's try this again. We're going to come over to another clip. It's going to be the Bay Area Lights, this 05 clip. And on this one, we basically perform an insert edit, but we teach them how to use the keyboard for plus moving ahead using like plus 4 seconds or 2 seconds. So we come to the beginning and we can see this is another time-lapse clip. And maybe we don't want to start an in point right at the very beginning. We just want to move ahead 1 second. So on your keypad, you can type +100, enter. You've moved ahead 1 second. You can hit I for your in point. And we tell them now if you wanted to go a certain number of seconds and frames, like 4 seconds and 10 frames, you would say +410, enter. And you jump ahead 4 seconds and 10 frames and hit out point. We don't get into the period key just yet. We save that. We just teach them how to use the keyboard. Now, if we want to figure out where this to insert this, we're going to put it right after this Milky Way clip here. So we can, once we've set our in and out point, we're all set up to do another insert. So we can just come in, and now we know two ways. We can either drag this in or use the toolbar. So you can tell them to use either way that they know how to do it, and just insert it right in place where it was. If we wanted to review this or add another clip in or do something else, it's important to know when you start using keyboard shortcuts that which viewer is active is going to play a very big part, right? Because you want to know if you're adding going ahead 4 seconds on the timeline or 4 seconds in the source viewer. And the way you do that is to look above the viewers, and the name that's in red is the name that is active. So in this case, the first rough cut is in the timeline is the active viewer. Now a way to switch them is you can just click in the other viewer, or you can hit the Q key. Q will toggle between the source viewer and the timeline viewer, just back and forth. So when you are keyboard oriented, Q is going to be very helpful because you're able to switch to the source viewer and move around. So I'm going to switch to my timeline viewer. I'm going to do now, we're going to perform a different type of edit. We're going to perform a video cutaway. So we're only going to take video, and we're going to do that on the second interview clip. So I'm going to move my playhead back, and he's going to say this first sentence, and we're going to cut away to a nicer picture instead of him talking on camera, because he says something about an impossible shot to get.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it.
So if it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. We want to cover up that picture of him, leave the sound, but cover up that picture of him and use an airplane at that point. So I'm going to go to the very beginning of the clip. I'm going to mark in point. I'm going to play it.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it.
I'm going to stop, and I'm going to hit my out point. So now I have an in and an out in the timeline, and I want to fill that with a clip from my B-roll bin. I'm going to come over to my jet landing, which is 04 jet landing, right? I'm going to double click that. And this clip, as you can see from the overlay, has audio in it. So I'm not going to take the audio, but it's good to point out that it has audio. But we want to use his voice instead of keeping the audio. The first thing I'm going to do is set an in point here. And I'm going to find the point just where the wheels are in the frame and back it up, just so you can see the tips of them. And that's going to be my in point. Now, I don't have to set an out point because I already have an in and an out in the timeline. So it will basically figure out the duration of the source clip that it needs to fill that gap in and out, that in and out gap in the timeline. Now, I don't want to take this audio that comes with the clip. So down in the timeline header, you can see I have a video one and an audio one. And the V1 and A1 are the tracks that are on my source clip that I'll be editing. So if I don't want to take the audio, I will click on this destination control, A1. You can see when it's on, it has a red outline. That means it will be edited in. When it's off, it turns gray. That means it won't be edited in. Now I want to do an overwrite because I want to cover up this portion of his interview. So I know two ways to do that, right? I can use the button in the toolbar or drag from the source to the timeline viewer. I'll just press the button and you can see now it overwrote that, and I can back up my playhead here and I'm able to play it and see.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right,
so we're going to do a very similar one here, but we're going to create an overwrite in a different way. Instead of editing on the same track, a lot of people like to edit cutaways on different tracks. So what we're going to do is do the same thing. We're going to use that next line in the timeline to mark an in and out point. So I'm going to back up to our last previous cut at the end of that jet landing and mark an in point. I'm going to use his next sentence as where I want to mark an out point.
If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right.
So right after that word right, I'm going to press O to mark an out point, and now I have an in and an out in my timeline. And I'm going to do a new clip. I'm going to come up and choose this 03 clip right here. Now I'm going to come to maybe the beginning of this clip here. And I'm just going to go ahead 2 seconds. But if I know that I want to go ahead 2 seconds, this is where we teach the period key as a 00 frames. Instead of typing 200 for 2 seconds, the period key will act as a 00 frame. So what I can do is type +2 period enter, and that says that it is 2 seconds. The period replaces the 00, so it saves you one keystroke for doing that. So I moved ahead 2 seconds. That's my in point. I don't need an out point, and I want to perform a different type of edit, one that isn't in the toolbar here. I'm going to drag over from my source viewer into my timeline viewer, and you can see I have all these different types of edits. And one of them, right in the middle here, is called place on top. And what that will do is it will actually add a second video track and place this clip on top based on the in and out that I have in the timeline. So I'm going to say place on top. You can see it adds a clip on the timeline, and now I'll play over that, and you can see how when it runs into a clip that's on a higher track, it plays that clip instead of the segment that's under it.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would.
And then it's right back to our interview. So that's two ways to perform a cutaway. One of the easiest edits to make is if you have something that just wants to go to the end of your timeline. For instance, in our bin, we have our ending credits bin. We have these movie credits, and we just want to place the movie credits at the end. So I know I want this whole clip, so I'm not going to mark an in and out point on my source clip. And I don't care where my playhead is in the timeline because I can just drag from my source viewer into my timeline viewer and choose append at end. It's really the easiest edit you're ever going to make because all it does is no matter where your playhead is in the timeline, it just places this clip right at the end of your timeline. Makes it really easy for credits or things that you just need to go to the end and you might be zoomed in on your timeline. You might not be able to see it. That function makes it really easy just to add things to the end, and here it is.
Everything was real.
Now the last edit we make in the end of this lesson is a replace edit. And what we do is we come back to the beginning of this jet landing clip and we play it over it.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it.
So he says if it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. So we'd like something that looks really like it was an effort to go shoot. And this looks rather dull. So we want to replace this shot. I'm going to go back into my B-roll, and I'm going to go to my 10 Maldives clip. Now if you play this from the beginning, you can see it's a plane, it's a beautiful shot, half underwater, and then this seaplane flies overhead. So we want to replace this shot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom into my timeline to get in closer to this 04 jet landing. And you do that by coming up to your upper right hand corner of the toolbar and just dragging this slider to increase the zoom magnification on your timeline. So I know that I want to replace this shot, and I'd really like it so that
it was possible to
right around where these planes, where you see the engines come overhead, right about there, I want this plane to be overhead, right? I don't know where the beginning of the clip should be because it's just a sky with waves. I don't know where it should end, but I do know right around the time that I'm seeing these engines come on screen is where I would like the plane to come in, roughly the right timing. So I'm lining up the playheads basically. I'm saying at this point of time in my timeline, at this point in this duration of this clip, I would like this frame to replace this frame. So I don't have to figure out any in and out points. I just know this sync point between this frame and this frame have to match. And then resolve will go and back time the in point in order to match this duration. That's called a replace edit. It's right here in your toolbar, or if you want to perform it by dragging, you can drag from your source viewer to your timeline viewer and then choose replace. And automatically it figures out the right duration based on the clip's duration, and as I play this, it backed it up so it starts right here on an empty sky.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the
a much nicer shot. And that ends lesson 3. And lesson 4 is altogether different. So if they screwed this timeline up, or if they didn't follow you exactly, it doesn't matter, because what we're going to do in the next lesson is import a brand new project that will set up a bin full of timelines for the next few lessons.